if the Liberals axe the tax, how does that affect support for the Conservatives?
It's starting to crumble. Welcome back to Moose on Loose. My name's David. Today's top story here. We've got one of Justin Trudeau's ministers flip-flopping almost immediately after Trudeau has said he's going to step down. We've also got some outrageous claims being made on CBC, as well as seeing the start of the return of the Freedom Convoy. Let's jump into this. This one is hilarious. The caption too here from CBC Watcher is funny too. Trudeau's biggest CBC turd polisher, Aaron Wherry, actually says Trudeau was the first prime minister since King to be a wartime minister in a way.
I think you guys are right that the setting is interesting and a reminder of that time during COVID when I think Justin Trudeau became, in a way, you know, for maybe the first prime minister since King to really kind of be a wartime prime minister in a way.
Get this guy off the air. This is insane. Like, he's been sniffing way too much glue. It was a war. It's against his own people. Oh, everyone's got the same comment here. Trudeau is at war with Canadians. Him actually speaking. Start packing, Aaron. 2-for-1 packing tape on Amazon. Next up on Vassie's panel here, she talks about Jonathan Wilkinson and how he's basically flip-flopping on one of Trudeau's policies now that Trudeau isn't going to be the leader. This is exposing they were forced to support his policies. There wasn't really truly support on it.
So off the top of the show, we talked to Jonathan Wilkinson, the Minister of Energy, Marika, in that vein, who kind of indicated the same thing. We need a leader who focuses on business, on the economy, and then went on to say, yes, he would stick with the carbon tax, but would reconsider the emissions cap, which is like a marquee environmental policy for this government, which he has defended to me on multiple instances.
He is in charge of.
Right. He is one of the ministers in charge of. How difficult is it going to be for people like him? And I bet you there's going to be a lot of other ministers who throw their hat in the ring saying similar things to sell that kind of a more centrist message when they've spent so long doing otherwise.
So just to summarize here, that emissions cap is a cap aimed at 35% reduction below 2019 levels by 2030, translating approximately to 106 to 112 million tons of CO2 equivalent. The cap will be implemented through a cap and trade system, which sets limits on total emissions and allows companies to buy and sell emission allowances. There's a way to slice it, though. If you have emissions cap in our country, it means other countries like Saudi Arabia will just produce more and sell more, and we'll sell less, and we'll be less prosperous. And clearly, Jonathan Wilkinson realizes that, and that's why he's now speaking up, because Trudeau won't be the leader.
To be everything. I mean, the Conservatives are already spinning this "just like Justin" slogan, right? And that captures somebody like Jonathan Wilkinson entirely. Jonathan Wilkinson is in cabinet. How can he now go to a cabinet meeting this week and continue defending the emissions cap or talking about the implementation of the regulations or talk to Danielle Smith when he said that on your show? So there's huge challenges for people like that who are so closely tied to the prime minister, to his decision making. It's the same challenge for Chrystia Freeland. And it
probably the biggest challenge for her because she's been their biggest communicator.
Yeah, and Justin Trudeau made that as difficult for her as possible on Monday.
By my side for 10 years. Yeah.
So, you know, there is a huge challenge, and you see, therefore, the opportunity for somebody like Mark Carney or Christy Clark, at least on that side. Christy Clark has French issues. Mark Carney has a lot of explaining to do about his role and everything in the last month.
But they're at least outside of cabinet.
But they are outside of cabinet. And so that is really going to be an issue, and it really raises just more questions about, if that's what you're saying now, what do you actually mean? Because yesterday you were saying something totally different.
They're all a bunch of liars. They're all there for the big paycheck. They supported Trudeau because they're getting paid. They didn't really believe in what they were voting for. The whole party is dead. They'll say anything at this point to keep their jobs. Yeah. Without a rigorous process that includes foreign interference, this process will be tainted along with the party. Looks like dead-end street for them when it's election time. Who cares? Let's vote. Yeah, exactly. Next up, we've got this, the Freedom Convoy 2025. So I've been hearing about this, people starting to gather. It's one last hurrah here to try getting rid of Justin Trudeau. As it says here, how about we close the government for a year to stop the spread of bull crap? Okay, so I can have that music in there, but Canadians are coming out. It's nice to see some Canadian flags and not those other flags we're seeing all the time with the drum beats and the war chants. But Canadians come out here holding hands. Better watch out. If they bring out the bouncy castles, they might be bringing out the horses. So stay vigilant, my friends. Stay agile. It's time. God bless Canada. So people are asking about the dates. Some people saying is it the 22nd? A bunch of people saying they want to join in. I thought this was interesting. The Liberal Party is running this ad of Justin Trudeau right now. So we're not going to watch the full thing. I just want to point out what their keystones, their corner pillars of this are.
You are the ones that know that when we all put in the work together, we can accomplish great things. Great things like the Canada Child Benefit.
Families should be able to afford raising kids without this. And as it goes on, it just keeps naming things $10 a day childcare, which most families can't get access to. Middle class tax cuts, which isn't true because you've imposed carbon tax, which has made this one of the most taxed countries on earth. Unlocking nearly 4 million homes. This is also a lie. These homes are getting built. The bureaucracy is not building anything. And on top of that, they're bringing in way too many people that it doesn't matter. There's never going to be enough homes at this current rate. The dental care plan, which is only accessible to seniors. National School Food Program, which is just a framework that doesn't actually provide any meals. We've already got school food programs across the country he could have just funded, but he wanted to stick his name on something because he's a narcissistic pig. Real climate action that they don't measure. It's all been a big farce, a big scam to steal our money, funnel it into all these dirty companies and projects like Stephen Guilbeault, climate action king here. Dirty money getting funneled into a company that he's involved in, Cycle Capital. It's all a big scam. A strong economy for the future, yet our GDP is absolutely decimated. Our dollar is worth nothing. Thank you, Team Trudeau. Yeah, thanks for nothing. We got this report here saying, what if one of these liberals did axe the carbon tax? And just a side note, this is hilarious because they picked all the youngest photos they could find of these people. Like, look at baby-faced Dominic LeBlanc and Mark Carney with dark hair. He's all gray now.
Well, you talk about a shortened timeline. We were just speaking with Vashi Kapelos about this timeline. It's around 11 weeks or less to pick a new leader. That person potentially becomes the prime minister for how many days or weeks, we don't know, until there's an election called. Numerous Liberal MPs have said after this news yesterday, they want to see the party move more to the center. So if the Liberals also axe the carbon tax, some MPs saying that includes changing things around carbon tax. If the Liberals axe the tax, how does that affect support for the Conservatives?
Well, the Conservatives, be careful what you ask for. I think they wanted to run against Trudeau, and for good reasons. The polls are the polls. But you now got a government that's going to try and reset its agenda, reset its leadership, reset its position in the political sort of world. And so the question then becomes, were Canadians tired of Trudeau, or were Canadians tired of the Liberals, or Canadians tired of their MP? Mm-hmm. And different people give you different.
It's all of them. All of them.
Different responses to that. I think the biggest problem was that people had tuned Trudeau out, and certainly the key players around his cabinet had also been impacted. That's why I think Chrystia Freeland's going to have a very difficult time putting daylight between herself and the Prime Minister. They were literally joined at the hip in cabinet.
Yeah, that's going to be hard for her to separate. And I should note my MP is Gord Johns, NDP. So yes, I'm tired of him.
And caucus and politically for the last 10 years. So a newcomer is probably more likely to be able to sort of address that issue of trying to move more demonstrably to the center. But at the same time, the issues that are challenging Canadians, whether it's healthcare, whether it's the high cost of food, whether it's the housing crisis, in particular for first-time buyers, but also for the homeless, those sorts of issues don't get solved with tax cuts. And they don't get solved with eliminating government response.
I don't think that's a correct statement. If Pierre Poilievre goes in and does what he says, cut a whole bunch of this government waste and spending, it will bring down inflation, thus increasing the value of our money, which then helps to fight homelessness. It helps to fight hunger and starvation. It's a silent thief here in Canada. The inflation is the worst thing that's happened to us. Trudeau's wiped out like 30% of all of our bank accounts. Just imagine if you had $100 in the bank account, Trudeau comes in, jacks this inflation with all his money printing, that $100 is now worth $70 now.
You don't suddenly simply say we're going to remove all the restrictions in the housing market and bingo, tomorrow you get a house. You've got to methodically and constructively invest and change those policies when it comes to have impact on Canadians. So Canadians are now going to be tested. Is the leadership they want to change it? Is it policy they want to change? And I think that when you talk to most Canadians, universal dental care and $10 a day child care and the national housing strategy to the degree that it's worked, the boost to OAS, the track record of Trudeau is not what's in dispute. He was the problem. And while he talked about it a little,
his track record is in dispute too. And everything he's done has not been in service of Canadians. I mean, look at him jacking immigration. The guy owns a real estate development company.
A little bit yesterday. Yeah. I don't think we even then clearly sort of highlighted what was understood by most Canadians, which is he was the problem. So what we'll see now is whether the leadership campaigns can reframe the debate and capture the imagination of enough members of the public to drive change. And that's what's in front of us for the next 11 weeks.
Adam Vaughan, former Liberal MP and principal at Navigator. Great.
So former Liberal MP, we're not surprised. Will it change things, say, if Francois Philippe Champagne becomes Prime Minister and axes the tax? Will everyone just swoon and start supporting him? No. He might get a little bit of boost from Liberals who had left Trudeau, but then they came back. It's not going to sway the polls. Just call an election. The Conservatives are going to win. You guys know it. Next up, we got this clip here with Kate Harrison. She's the only voice of reason on the CBC, and she absolutely rips Trudeau here.
That we don't know yet what the rules are. We don't know the timeline. We don't know who's going to run. If a minister's got to step down, I don't know how, for example, say Dominic LeBlanc, who's thought to be running, could be finance minister, border czar, and leadership candidate. But, you know, just do the thought exercise of the names that are out there. I don't know if anyone scares the Conservatives, but who do you think poses maybe the biggest challenge to the Conservatives in changing the dynamic and making at least a more narrow, more competitive picture in the short?
So one thing to note there, so David Cochrane's talking about Dominic LeBlanc. Well, they're basically saying if they're going to be running for leadership, then they need to drop out of their cabinet position. If Dominic LeBlanc is in charge of the border security and finance minister, now he drops out. Say Champagne drops out and Melanie drops out. Now we don't have Minister of Innovation. We don't have Minister of Foreign Affairs. Like, it's a real clown show. Like, what is going to happen here?
I think it is very difficult to do that just because of how short the runway is.
Yeah.
So Justin Trudeau has, I would disagree with Cheryl, that there is a big difference in terms of how this has unfolded compared to the Biden and Harris shakeup that happened last summer. Biden left his party in a far better position, polling-wise, than Justin Trudeau is leaving his Liberal Party. Yes, there was a very short runway to have a new leader, and it was impossible for Kamala Harris to create that distinction. I would argue that an incoming Liberal leader will have that same challenge. But Trudeau, because he was incapable of seeing past his own ego, has left his party incredibly weakened. And so regardless of the name that comes in, and I suspect regardless of the rules, it will almost certainly have to be an establishment name. I think an outsider stands an outside to the degree one it's even being discussed. I would say no one we're discussing is an outsider, but an establishment name will benefit from probably any scenario.
Like the guy we just showed, what's his name? I almost forgot here. Frank Baylis. That no established name. Nobody knows who that guy is. I won't even remember an hour from now.
And that's probably their best bet to make their case to Canadians. But Trudeau has created a circumstance that is, I would argue, impossible for any Liberal contender to seriously create differentiation, become a known entity to Canadians in perhaps as little as a 6-7 week period. Like, what an uphill battle that he has saddled the party with.
Well, yeah, and your leadership campaign then has to roll into your general election campaign. And Cheryl, I don't know if it's impossible, but boy, there's a high degree of difficulty there, right? So how do you...
Trudeau's ego has filled all the space. There's no room left. Trudeau isn't nearly clever enough to have done anything on his own. His biggest enablers are all today's leading contenders to replace him. She's a breath of fresh air, defining what's happening and not taking sides. This is what I'm saying. He screwed over his own party. Yeah, he didn't care. He cares about himself. That's it. Probably the woman who confronted him in BC and just said, F off, get out of our province here. Like, that was probably what broke him. He's with his kids. It was in front of his kids. If you notice, you go back to when he was on the beach, he quickly escorted Keenan Bexty away from his kids because he started getting heckled there. That's his weak spot. He doesn't want to be humiliated in front of his kids. And that's essentially getting told to get the F out of BC. That probably broke him. So I've got an update here. So I brought out that video interviews with Frank Baylis, this billionaire Liberal. He was in Trudeau's first cabinet. You guys were quick to point out, as I suspected, there was probably some corruption involved. As we've got here, ex-MP says no backroom dealings were involved in subcontract to 10,000 ventilators. And here's Frank Baylis himself, $237 million ventilator contract gifted with $100 million overpayment. So this title here says it all. So basically, Captain Carbon here was selling ventilators to Ottawa for $23,700 per unit, when typically they're sold for $13,700 per unit, which means the government is overpaying $10,000 per unit. On 10,000 units, that means it's $100 million. Contracts given to Baylis' firm accounted for $700,000 and $273,000 for the medical contract itself, as well as $422,000 for an additional Department of Industry research contract. So basically, he made a ton of money doing this. He did this right after his 4 years in government. Was that why he went into government, is to make those connections and get stinking rich? Here's Frank at testimony denying everything.
No, I know that it's been suggested, and that I can state unequivocally here that I did not speak to people said I spoke to the Prime Minister. No, I did not speak to the Prime Minister. I did not speak to cabinet ministers to ask them or influence them for a contract. I did not speak to members of Parliament of any party. In fact, I didn't speak to anybody to try and influence them to give a contract to Baylis Medical or to Mr. Jameson or to Ventilators for Canadians. I was not. I was involved in one phone call that Mr. Jameson had set up, which had to do with the advancements that we needed to go secure the parts. That was my involvement with Mr. Jameson as he was negotiating and putting together this consortium. So I was not reaching out or doing any kind of backroom, as has been suggested, request to anyone.
Yeah, I'm not buying it. There's situations being created, then there's people profiting off of these created situations. Next up, we got some footage here of Jennifer O'Connell. She's basically saying Dominic LeBlanc is not going to be throwing his hat in. He'll just be supporting Trudeau. So essentially right now we can cross him off the list for the Liberal leadership race.
Saying Dominic LeBlanc, should he change his mind?
He absolutely should. He has what it takes to beat Pierre Poilievre, and I think he has broad support from caucus. So I really hope he does reconsider and put his name in the hat, in the ring.
What is it that he has that you think could beat Poilievre?
Well, I think Dominic has incredible political sense, but more than that, he understands this country. He understands what Canadians are facing.
No, he doesn't. We don't need Trudeau's babysitter to be running our country. Quite literally, he was Trudeau's babysitter growing up. The reason she's supporting Dominic LeBlanc is she's the parliamentary secretary to Dominic LeBlanc. So when he makes a new cabinet, if he were to run, then she would likely get an upgrade to minister. These rats are all very predictable. We've got yet another carjacking because they happen every day in Canada. Check out this one.
Police in the Toronto suburb of Mississauga are investigating a possible connection between an attempted carjacking and an incident that left one person suffering from a gunshot wound. It happened on Saturday night. Photos show what appears to be a yellow Lamborghini at the scene of an attempted carjacking. Officials say that the victim suffered from minor injuries and that the suspect had fled in an unknown vehicle. Officials say they responded soon after to another call and a victim with a gunshot wound being taken to hospital.
Something has to change. You can't just be having this in our country. If there's no suspect description, it's the usual suspects. Yeah, they're all from the same 3 or 4 countries. And it's not Canada. Next up, we've got an update from Vancouver. Things are looking just as Trudeau intended. Yeah, this is... I used to live like 3 blocks from here, and this is twice as bad as it was when I lived there. So next up, we got this one posted by the Pleb here. It says, Indian scammer teaches other newcomers how to scam Canada by filing fraudulent bankruptcies and leaving the country afterwards. Why are we importing people like this? So he speaks in whatever language he's speaking here, but basically, if you look in the comments, there's a whole bunch of different schemes and scams here. People finding ways to either buy cars or scamming in other ways and then just taking off right away and not having to pay these things off. And a lot of people calling for deportation. I think these people need to be jailed. 10, 15 years in jail, get them doing hard work, provide value back to us, then they can go. They can't just be taking advantage of taxpayers. They have to pay the penalty. The insanity doesn't stop here in Canada, so we've got a bunch of police cars outside a building here in Mississauga.
Wow, crazy, dude.
So you can see here they swarmed the Malang Lounge, and I counted 14 cop cars outside this building. Somebody was watching the Jordan Peterson Poilievre interview on their phone. Definitely someone posted an offensive tweet. Some Christians reading from the Bible. Protesters needed coffee. Next up, we got this one here of Stephen Harper burning Jagmeet Singh.
In fact, with the NDP as a branch plant now of the Liberal Party, you know, geez, only Jagmeet Singh could walk into a room with Trudeau and come out with a deal where he gets nothing. I mean, you know, seriously. I just, look, I say this is out of pure jealousy. I just wish I'd had an opposition leader like that somewhere. You know, support me and I'll make sure you never have to go back to the voters, or at least for 5 years.
But a big fat pension, that's it. There you have it. Trudeau is the first leader since King to be a wartime leader. Regardless of which Liberal wins the leadership race, it's going to make no difference.